Sonia was an ordinary 8-year-old girl with habits typical for her age. She loved playing, building castles from blocks, and collecting dolls. But one day a toy came into her life that changed everything. One afternoon, Sonia and her mother went to the local flea market. It was an old, run-down place filled with strange, worn-out items. Among the old books and porcelain figurines, Sonia spotted a toy, a plush bear. It was old with worn fur and a slightly crooked smile, but its button eyes had something oddly captivating about them. "Mom, can I have him?" Sonia asked, pointing at the bear. Her mother hesitated. She couldn't explain why, but there was something off about the bear. Still, her daughter was so insistent that she eventually gave in. The vendor smiled as Sonia reached for the toy. His voice was low and raspy. "Take good care of him, little girl," he said as he handed over the bear. Toys don't like being abandoned. Sonia named the bear Benny. She carried him everywhere, talked to him, fed him, as if he were real. Soon her mother noticed that her daughter was withdrawing more and more from the family, spending hours in her room with Benny. "Sonia, are you coming to dinner?" her mother asked one evening. "I can't, Mom. Benny says I have to stay with him," she replied. That sentence filled her mother with unease. She decided to peek into Sonia's room and saw something strange. Sonia was sitting on the floor holding the bear, and its button eyes seemed alive. They reflected the light in a way ordinary buttons shouldn't. "It's just her imagination," her mother whispered to herself, trying to brush off her unease. But that night she heard strange noises, a faint rustling, like something soft moving across the floor, and quiet, almost inaudible whispers. The next day, Sonia told her mother a strange story. "Benny saved me from a monster," she said during breakfast. "What monster?" her mother asked. "At night, something with long arms came out from under my bed. It tried to grab me, but Benny scared it away." Her mother felt a chill. This was too strange to be a simple child's dream, but Sonia seemed so sincere. That night, her mother decided to investigate. She fell asleep in the next room, but woke up to a noise. It was coming from Sonia's room. When she opened the door, her heart froze. The bear was lying on the floor, its button eyes glowing red. Sonia was peacefully asleep, but on the floor were claw marks, as if something had tried to crawl out from under the bed. Days passed and Benny took over Sonia's life. She stopped playing with other toys. She whispered to the bear, and it seemed to twitch its ears in response. One day her mother overheard Sonia saying, "Okay, Benny, I'll do whatever you ask." That night, her mother found all of Sonia's dolls torn to pieces. Their faces were scratched beyond recognition, their eyes ripped out. Benny sat on the floor, his button eyes glowing once again. The next day, her mother decided to get rid of the bear. While Sonia was at school, she grabbed Benny and threw him in the trash bin outside. But that evening, when Sonia came home, she cried, "Where's Benny? He said he'd come back for me." Her mother tried to comfort her, but then they heard a knock. It came from the door. When she opened it, there was the bear on the doorstep. Its fur was dirty, but its button eyes glowed brighter than ever. "I warned you," whispered a raspy voice. The next morning, neighbors called the police. The house was silent, but it was empty inside. Neither the mother nor Sonia was anywhere to be found. On the living room floor lay the bear. Its button eyes no longer glowed, but its face was frozen in a chilling, crooked smile. It happened one autumn when I bought an old camera at a garage sale. The camera looked worn but functional. The seller, an elderly man, assured me it could capture photos with a unique atmosphere. I love photography, so I bought it eagerly, anticipating some one-of-a-kind shots. That evening, I went to the nearby park. Autumn was at its peak. The trees were ablaze with red and golden hues, and the air was filled with the smell of damp leaves. I snapped photo after photo, trying to capture the light filtering through the branches. When I got home, I decided to develop the film right away. As the first photo appeared on the paper, I froze. The picture wasn't just of the park. Standing in the center was a child, a boy about 8 years old. He wore old-fashioned clothes, a shirt, suspenders, and shorts, like something from another era. He stood under a tree, staring directly at the camera. I didn't remember seeing anyone there. The area had been empty. I developed more photos, but the boy didn't appear in any of them except for that one. The next day, I decided to take the camera out again. This time, I went to the old town square, where people often walked around. I photographed passers-by, buildings, and pigeons on the cobblestones. When I developed the new photos, a chill ran down my spine. The boy was there again. This time, he was standing near the fountain, slightly closer to the camera. His face was blank, emotionless. But his eyes, there was something deeply unsettling about them, an eerie emptiness. Who was he? Why did he only appear in the photos? I told my friend Max about it. He was a history enthusiast and suggested I look into the camera's origins and the history of the locations. A few days later, I went back to the seller who had sold me the camera. I showed him the photo of the boy, hoping for an explanation. The man turned pale. "I didn't mean to," he stammered. "I thought it didn't work like that anymore." "What doesn't work? Who is this in the photo?" I demanded. "The camera belonged to my grandmother," he explained. "She used to take photos of children before they disappeared. No one ever found out where they went, but their faces always appeared in her photos. My family tried to destroy the camera, but it always came back. I thought selling it would stop everything." I left his house in shock. This camera was more than just an old artifact, but the worst was yet to come. I decided never to use the camera again. But a few days later, my curiosity got the better of me. I went out again, took a few photos by an old bridge, and returned home. As usual, the photos were disturbing. In one of them, the boy was even closer to the camera. I could see every detail now: his dirty shorts, his worn-out shoes. But the most terrifying thing was his expression. His face was no longer blank. He was staring directly at me, his eyes filled with anticipation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt like someone was watching me. The curtains in my room moved slightly, even though the windows were closed. And then I heard it, a faint, childish giggle. The next morning, I called Max and told him everything. He suggested we get rid of the camera. We drove out of town to an old quarry and threw it into the deep pit. I hoped that would be the end of it. But a week later, there was a knock on my door. It was the postman with a package. Inside was the camera. Underneath it was a photograph. It was of me, sleeping in my bed. The boy was standing next to me, his face inches from mine. His eyes were full of sinister curiosity. Since then, I've stopped taking photos. The camera is gone, but I still hear a child's laughter at night. Sometimes I think I see something moving in the corner of the room, or someone.
I never thought my son could do something strange. He was always a quiet, slightly reserved boy. At just 6 years old, he loved to play in the backyard of our house, which was surrounded by dense forest. Our home was far from the city, on the edge of a small village. The peace and nature were what we loved most about this place. But one day, everything changed. One morning, my son Tommy came to me with a joyful expression on his face. "Mom, I made a friend in the forest," he said, smiling widely. I didn't think much of it. Little kids often invent imaginary friends. I just asked casually, "What's his name?" "He said his name is Ollie," Tommy replied. "He lives in the forest and knows all the trees." "That's great," I said, not giving it much thought. But over the next few days, I started noticing strange things. Tommy began spending more and more time in the forest. He would come back covered in dirt, but always with a wide smile. One day, I asked him what he and Ollie did together. "We play," he said. "Ollie shows me his secret places." When I asked who Ollie was, Tommy looked at me seriously. "He's not a person, Mom, but he's nice." At night, Tommy began talking in his room, as if to someone invisible. He laughed and whispered. When I peeked in, he was sitting on the floor, staring at nothing. I thought it was just a child's game, but then I noticed the strange drawings. On paper, he had drawn trees with something odd hidden among them, a tall figure with long, stretched limbs and eyes that took up almost its entire face. The drawing was unsettling, but I brushed it off as his active imagination. Then, odd things started happening in the house. At night, I heard rustling outside, as if someone was slowly walking around. Our dog, Buck, began growling at the windows and doors, his fur standing on end. One night, I found muddy footprints on the kitchen floor. They looked like a child's, but Tommy had been asleep the whole time. When I tried to talk to Tommy about Ollie, he became defensive. "You just don't understand," he yelled. "Ollie is my friend. He doesn't want to hurt you unless you make him angry." His words sent a chill down my spine. Make him angry? Why would anyone need to worry about upsetting an imaginary friend? The next day, I decided to go into the forest myself while Tommy was at school. I wanted to see what he had found. The forest seemed normal, but soon I stumbled upon something strange, a circle of stones with branches arranged into a strange symbol. In the center lay a doll made of sticks, with a piece of dirty cloth tied around its head. I felt like someone was watching me. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing. I quickly left. That night, I woke up to a loud noise. Tommy wasn't in his bed. Panic flooded me as I rushed to look for him. The windows were open and the back door was ajar. I ran into the forest, shouting his name. Deep among the trees, I saw him. Tommy was standing still, looking up as if at something I couldn't see. "Tommy, come back home," I screamed. He turned to me slowly and said, "Ollie says you're in the way." And then I heard a crack behind me. Turning around, I saw it. A tall figure with long limbs, just like in Tommy's drawings. Its glowing eyes were the only feature on its blank face. I tried to grab Tommy's hand, but he pulled away. "Ollie says it's time for me to stay with him," he said calmly. I screamed and begged him to come back, but suddenly everything went silent. Tommy and the figure were gone, as if they had never been there. It's been months. Tommy was never found. The police wrote it off as a tragic accident, but I know the truth. Sometimes late at night, I hear his voice in the forest. He calls for me, saying Ollie is waiting for me, but I don't go.